Mickey Mouse is probably the most iconic cartoon character of all time, but would it surprise you to know that in the early days of the Disney theme parks, Mickey had a very limited presence in the attractions of both parks. But Mickey's most notable was a very large and impressive animatronic show, with Mickey's Animatronic, which was his first and only for 50 years, being the most advanced of all animatronics at the time. Now this show has been gone for quite a while, but in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Mickey Mouse's forgotten first animatronic show. I think the best place to start this story is going to be in 1962, as in December of that year, Walt Disney, the legend himself, did an interview with Newsweek, and in the article, he talked about plans for animatronics in future Disneyland attractions. The ones mentioned were the birds that would be in the Enchanted Tiki Room, Abraham Lincoln, oh, why is he naked? Okay, that's better. Anyways, Abraham Lincoln, in a show known as One Nation Under God, that would also include animatronics for all of the presidents up to that point, and also plans for a haunted house attraction that would have animatronics for ogres, elves, and transparent ghosts, and that would go on to become the Haunted Mansion. Now all of those attractions, in one way or another, would open in Disneyland, and Walt would have a hand in each of their creation. But after those projects, Walt mentioned another in the interview, one for all of the Disney characters so everyone can see them. I have in mind a theater, and the figures will not only put on the show, but also be sitting in the boxes with the visitors, heckling. I don't know just when I'll do that. Now, for my understanding, Walt would not ever work on this idea, as other than this statement, nothing ever happened regarding it during his lifetime, or at the original Disneyland park in California. When it was decided to make a Disney theme park in Florida in the late 60s, all kinds of plans were thrown around for attractions, but a man by the name of Bill Justice, who was heavily involved in a lot of the Disney theme park stuff and animation stuff, had a slight nitpick with some of the attractions. That being that a lot of them had nothing to do with Disney. For example, he said, Pirates of the Caribbean was a big hit, but what did it have to do with Disney? What we needed was a reminder of what Walt had accomplished. So Justice, assumedly somewhat inspired by that article I mentioned earlier, came up with the perfect idea that would utilize Disney's iconic characters, and also serve as an attraction dedicated to Walt's many characters over the years. As he had recently passed away, the idea that Justice came up with was an animatronic show of an orchestra, made up of Disney characters, that was led by Mickey Mouse, and it would not only have the orchestra, but it would also show off famous musical moments from Disney's most iconic movies. No animatronic characters that sit with the audience, though. Justice would then pitch the idea to Roy Disney, who was the current head of the company, and he loved the idea, so it was greenlit. And it would go on to become an opening day e-ticket attraction at the new park in Florida. Now, if you do not know what I mean by e-ticket, back in the early days of the Disney parks, you had to buy a ticket to a specific attraction if you wanted to use it, and the pricing depended on what letter rank the attraction was. And an e-ticket attraction was the highest letter rank, meaning it cost the most. So the Mickey Mouse Revue cost a whopping 90 cents to go see, which may not sound like a lot, but adjusting for inflation, it'd be around $7 per person in today's money. Alright, now let's talk about the attraction itself. The exterior of the building, which can be seen here, had a sort of medieval look to it, like the other attractions in the Fantasyland area. Once entering the building, the first notable thing you see is this art of Mickey statues on the walls, which showcases Mickey's outfits from some of his most famous shorts, like Sorcerer Mickey, Steamboat Willie Mickey, and Conductor Mickey. Then the visitors would head into a pre-show room that could only hold 300 people, which is funny because the main showroom could hold 500 people, so someone messed that up. The pre-show room played a video starring a... what is this thing? Is it a string from like an instrument? Anyways, this fellow calls himself the soundtrack, and he just talks for 8 minutes about the use of music and sound in Disney's animations. Then at the end of the pre-show, several costumed characters would appear on screen, and Mickey would then say, "Hello folks, it's time for the Mickey Mouse Musical Revue." Now you may have heard something there. Mickey called the show the Mickey Mouse Musical Revue, which was not the actual name. It was simply just the Mickey Mouse Revue, but during the planning stages, that was the original name of the show. And I guess the pre-show was filmed before the final name was settled on. And before I get into the show itself, this is probably a good time to go over some of the changes the animatronic cast of the show got. There was originally going to be 86 animatronic characters, and going off this book that was made to promote the attraction to give it a little backstory, My guess as to who the 5 scrapped were are Geppetto, Pinocchio, Horace Horsecollar, and then Mickey Mouse's 2 nephews. Now Mickey's nephews, as you can see here, are not actually on the stage, but since there were 5 cancelled characters, and 3 of those are clearly on the stage, it would be logical to assume that the last 2 are the nephews. Also, there may have been even more cancelled characters, as apparently Clara Cluck and the Big Bad Wolf were going to appear in the show as animatronics. Now, since I've brought up this prequel book, I might as well go over what it entails, although it's pretty simple stuff. Mickey gets a letter that states that he's wanted to lead an orchestra at Disney World, and Mickey is super excited about this, so he runs off to tell all of his friends, and none of them care at all. So Mickey is sad on his flight that no one will see him conduct the orchestra, and that they don't care about his career as a music conductor. And I can't blame them. Like, oh, big whoop, Mickey gets to move his arms around, let's go fly to Florida to see him. It's one of those things that may be impressive to do, but it's really boring to watch. For example, like a referee, no one wants to watch someone do that. Alright, there's my hot take on conducting. Let's get back to the story now. But in a plot twist, it turns out all of Mickey's friends were just tricking him, and they knew all along, and they wanted to surprise him that they were the ones in the orchestra. What kind of surprise is that? The book itself is called Surprise for Mickey Mouse. You would think the surprise would be a little bit more interesting than that. Okay, now let's go over the actual show. After you watched the 8-minute long pre-show, you would enter a room much bigger than the pre-show room, but that did not matter because there would still be around 200 empty seats, due to the whole pre-show capacity issue I mentioned earlier. Once you were in the room and took your seat, there was a large curtain in front of you that would block the stage. I like these comedy and tragedy mask Mickey up here. When it was time for the show, the curtains would pull apart to unveil Disney's most advanced animatronic at the time, the one and only Mickey Mouse, who would rise out of the ground and soon be joined by a large cast of other Disney characters. And the only one here that would speak would be Mickey, who was voiced by Jimmy McDonald, and he was the second person to voice the mouse, taking the role on after Walt Disney. And he was in a load of Disney's animated stuff. He provided a lot of sound effects, and also voiced some characters. My favorite in the orchestra has got to be Ka, who is playing his body like a flute, which makes absolutely no sense. And it's funny because they very easily could have just put a flute like wrapped around his tail, but I guess Baloo was already on the flute, so they just wanted to make it different. Mickey and his orchestra would start the show by playing Hi Ho from Snow White, then go into Whistle While You Work, also from Snow White.
1, 2, 3, 4.
After that, Minnie Mouse would then do a little solo on her violin of When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio, and then the rest of the characters would jump back in and do An Actor's Life for Me, also from Pinocchio. After those first 4 songs, Mickey and his orchestra would then be lowered back below the stage, and a projection of the Big Bad Wolf would be cast on the curtains, who would slowly walk across, until a curtain opened revealing the 3 little pigs, who would sing Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf.
Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Tra-la-la-la-la.
Now, if you're not well versed in Disney lore like myself, you may be wondering why the 3 little pigs are here. Well, the 3 little pigs and the Big Bad Wolf starred in a short together back in 1933, and it was one of Disney's biggest hits back in the day. It was huge, and so was the original song in the short, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf. So while the 3 little pigs and the Big Bad Wolf may not be as associated with Disney today by your casual person, they still represent a huge milestone in the early days of Disney. Now, the next segment, after the pigs, was another one of Disney's most important characters, that being Snow White, who was joined by some animals as she sang I'm Wishing from her movie Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. And you probably already know why that movie is so important. It was the first animated movie. I feel like that's all I have to say. After Snow White sang, she would then be joined by the 7 Dwarves, who would sing the Silly Song, which was also from their movie. After Snow White and the dwarves did their bit, Alice from Alice in Wonderland was up next, who was joined by some living flowers from her movie, and together they would sing In the Golden Afternoon. After Alice came the 3 caballeros, made up of Donald Duck, Jose Carioca, and Panchito, who would perform the titular song from their movie, The 3 Caballeros. And these 3 were fun, as while they were singing, they would appear in different spots of the theater. And after the 3 caballeros did their bit, the fairy godmother from Cinderella would show up, alongside Cinderella, and she would sing her song from the movie, Bippity Boppity Boo. And this was a cool part, as Cinderella got an outfit change mid-performance, where she would don her iconic dress. Then similarly to the Big Bad Wolf's appearance earlier, Cinderella and Prince Charming's silhouettes would dance together on the curtain, to the song, So This Is Love, also from Cinderella. Then came the best part of the show, as Br'er Rabbit, Br'er Fox, and Br'er Bear, from Song of the South, appeared and sang Zippity-Doo-Dah. And this was the first appearance of these characters in a Disney theme park, as their most notable appearance in Splash Mountain, rest in peace, would open in Disneyland in 1989, 18 years after the Mickey Mouse Revue first opened. Then alongside Br'er Rabbit, Br'er Fox, and Br'er Bear, every animatronic character would join in with the 3, and they would all sing Zippity-Doo-Dah in a grand finale. Then they would sing a little bit of the outro to the Mickey Mouse Club TV series, while being lowered back down below the stage. But before the end, Mickey gives one last bow, and thanks everyone for coming. So that was the Mickey Mouse Revue. Overall, pretty good show. Could have been a bit longer, I feel like. 10 minutes seems kind of short. For reference, the Country Bear Jamboree, which I'll talk about again in a bit, lasted 16 minutes. But I guess if you count the 8-minute pre-show, the overall experience is a better length. But the pre-show is really not the most interesting thing ever. The most interesting thing is definitely the large animatronic cast. And wow, there was a lot of them. In all, the show featured 81 animatronic characters, but some of those were duplicates, so there were 73 different characters, with Mickey being the most complex. Bill Justice said, Mickey had 33 functions crammed into a 42-inch body, and that's why Mickey was so complex. He had a very small body, which had to fit a lot of mechanics in it, to give him more fluent movement than the others. All things considered, the attraction was very impressive, and while it was pretty popular during the first couple of years after it was first introduced, there was another animatronic show at the park that was much more popular. Yep, that's right, the Hall of Presidents. No, I'm joking. I'm of course talking about the Country Bear Jamboree, which would end up killing the Mickey Mouse Revue. Okay, that's a bit dramatic. The Country Bear Jamboree just helped move it to a new home in the early 80s, when it was decided to build a new Disney theme park in Japan. One of the attractions that was planned to be built over there was another Mickey Mouse Revue, but it would have been kind of expensive to build a new one. So Disney had an idea. What if they took all of the parts that made up the show, like the animatronics and such, and brought them over to Japan, essentially picking up the attraction and dropping it in a new home? From my understanding, the main thing that spurred this on was the show not being as popular as the Country Bear Jamboree, but that might not actually be the reason. Bill Justice, in an interview, said that the reason he was told it was being removed was due to it never playing at full capacity. But if you recall, it would never play at full capacity, because the main showroom seated 500 while the pre-show room only fit 300. I think Disney was being a little sneaky with their reasoning, and they simply just wanted to save money. So the fairly popular Mickey Mouse Revue played its final show in September of 1980, when all of the parts that made up the show were shipped off to Tokyo Disneyland, where the show remained the same, minus of course it now being in Japanese. I did not read anything that talked about this, but I don't know if this version of the show fixed the pre-show capacity issue. If anyone knows, I would be very interested in knowing that. If I had to guess, I would say it probably did, but I have no idea. So the Mickey Mouse Revue was an opening day attraction at Tokyo Disneyland, which opened in 1983. So now that the Magic Kingdom in Florida had an empty theater, what would occupy that space? Well, the first notable thing, now, not the first, but the first notable thing, was a Lion King puppet show that would recreate scenes from the movie. And this show was known as The Legend of the Lion King, and I'd say it was a pretty good replacement. I kinda liked the show. The puppets look great. And it would play from 1994 to 2002, when the theater would get a new show that is still around to this day, Mickey's Philharmagic, which opened at the Magic Kingdom in October of 2003, and has remained in the park ever since. The Mickey Mouse Revue in Tokyo Disneyland ran from its opening day in 1983 to May of 2009, where it too was replaced with Mickey's Philharmagic, which remains to this day as well. Now, if you don't know what Mickey's Philharmagic is, it's kind of like a spiritual successor to to the Mickey Mouse Revue? Kind of. They both heavily utilize songs from Disney movies, but instead of animatronics, Philharmagic uses a 3D screen that shows Donald Duck being thrown into classic Disney musical moments. Although not from Disney's oldest movies, but mostly the ones from the Disney Renaissance. So with the introduction of Mickey's Philharmagic, the Mickey Mouse Revue was officially over. But there is something I want to bring up before I end, about some of the animatronics used in the show. So let's switch gear and take a look at Epcot, where at the Grand Fiesta Tour, which opened in 2007, the original ending to the ride, showed the three caballeros as animated characters on a screen. But in 2015, the original animatronics from the Mickey Mouse Revue of the three caballeros were fixed up and put into the attraction's ending, replacing the screen, which is a very good reuse of animatronics from 1970. And I just noticed this now, but Panchito got a new paint job at some point too. Here's a picture from 1969, and here you can see he is white instead of red. Now the other notable animatronic is the Mickey one. Remember, Disney's most advanced animatronic at the time, but that's definitely not the case anymore. Anyways, that figure was put into storage by Disney, who would occasionally bring him around to events. I don't know if they do that anymore. I don't think they do, but I'm sure they probably still have the figure. And this was actually the only Mickey animatronic for a long time, until 2020, so about 50 years, when Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway opened in Disney World at Hollywood Studios. So that was a very long time to go with only a singular animatronic ever made for Disney's most well-known character. Now as for the rest of the animatronics, I don't think it's known where they're at. Some of their molds were reused in some attractions, but regarding the just straight up originals, from my understanding, it is not known where they're at. And there you have it, a look back at Mickey Mouse's forgotten first animatronic show. Now, is it really forgotten? That's pretty subjective, but it has not been in a US Disney theme park for like 40 years, and it's not really talked about a lot nowadays, but it makes for an interesting title. Anyways though, if you enjoyed this video, a subscription, a like, and maybe even a comment would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.